Welcome to Meteorology Matters, the podcast exploring the science, chaos, and stories behind the weather that shapes our world. This show is created by meteorologist Rob Jones. Usually when we talk about seeking out a professional diagnosis, there's this built-in expectation of clean precision.
Right. It feels a bit like engineering.
Yeah, like if you fall and hurt your arm, you go to the hospital, the x-ray machine spins up, and a doctor shows you a screen.
With that jagged white line on a glowing bow.
And the doctor just points to it and gives you a binary answer. Your arm is broken, or your arm is not broken.
Well, which is deeply comforting to the human brain. We are really wired to seek out things that can be neatly categorized and resolved.
Because a broken bone is a tangible mechanical failure.
The fix is a cast. The timeline is 6 weeks. It's a clean narrative.
But then you take that same human brain with its desperate need for binary answers and you force it into the world of meteorology, specifically tropical meteorology and hurricane forecasting.
And suddenly that metaphorical X-ray machine is just completely shattered.
Yeah, we're looking at a forecasting landscape that is fundamentally murky. I mean, in meteorology, an accurate forecast is really only half the battle.
If even that.
Right. If a scientifically flawless forecast is misunderstood by the public, or if it's mistrusted, or if it just arrives too late for a family to pack their car and escape, that forecast has failed.
That concept, that idea of diagnostic muddy waters, it's really the core struggle of the entire profession.
Because we aren't just analyzing the fluid dynamics of the atmosphere, are we?
Not at all. We're analyzing how human beings process risk. We're looking at how our nervous systems react to fear, and how ordinary people are forced to make highly consequential, really expensive decisions under conditions of unavoidable uncertainty.
So our mission today is to explore that critical gap, the space between atmospheric science and human behavior.
It's a huge space.
It is. We're going to examine how uncertainty is communicated and why the visual tools you see on the news every summer, like the track cone and the hurricane category system, are, frankly, consistently misleading you.
And we'll also get into how emergency communicators actually build the operational trust required to save lives. Because getting the math right on a supercomputer, that's just the starting line.
Right. But historically, we didn't view it that way, did we?
No. For decades, the history of hurricane disasters was documented almost exclusively as a history of physics.
Like just looking at the raw numbers.
Yeah, we talked about wind speeds, barometric pressure drops, storm surge heights, radar returns. The prevailing assumption in the meteorological community was that if we simply perfected the math...
If we just bought a faster supercomputer, right?
Yeah, buy a faster supercomputer, increase the resolution of the models, and the public would automatically be safe. But history has proven that assumption tragically wrong.
Because a hurricane disaster is a social failure just as much as it is an extreme weather event.
The idea that a technically excellent forecast can completely fail socially is, well, it's heavy.
It means the message actually has to perfectly fit the decisions people are facing in their living rooms.
It does. And the inherent difficulty of hurricane communication is that it represents this massive clash of timescales.
How so?
Well, when a tropical cyclone is brewing out in the ocean, say 1,000 miles away, the public wants absolute certainty days in advance.
Which is completely fair. I mean, if you live on the coast, you want to know on a Tuesday if your specific neighborhood is going to take a direct hit on a Saturday.
It's an entirely rational demand. Evacuating is not a casual afternoon drive. It requires immense resources.
You're paying for a full tank of gas, a hotel room for potentially 3 or 4 nights, food on the road.
Plus, you might be losing wages because your workplace shuts down. You have to figure out what to do with your pets, your elderly relatives.
Not to mention the sheer psychological stress of packing up your most valuable possessions and just sitting in gridlock traffic for 14 hours.
The stakes for the individual are massive, but the atmosphere rarely provides certainty on a convenient schedule that aligns with human logistics.
Because the atmosphere is a chaotic system.
Right. So the meteorologist's job isn't merely taking data and reading it aloud. It's translating science into a framework that helps you make a consequential decision when all the facts aren't fully known yet.
But doesn't the expectation of a perfect forecast actually harm public safety in the long run? Like, if I'm sitting at home expecting the weather app on my phone to tell me exactly where a hurricane will be 96 hours from now, down to the zip code, I'm setting the science up to fail.
You're setting an impossible standard. The danger of that standard is the erosion of trust.
Because if they miss by an inch, it's a failure.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, if people expect pinpoint accuracy every single time, then any normal, statistically expected deviation in a storm's track is perceived as a busted forecast.
Let's say a storm makes landfall 50 miles down the coast from the original center line.
Scientifically, that is a highly accurate forecast. But socially, the people who prepared and didn't get hit feel like they were lied to.
And when the public believes the forecast is busted, trust evaporates.
And trust is the only currency an emergency communicator has. If you lose it on a near miss, you won't have the public's attention for the next event.
Which could be the one that actually levels the city.
Mm-hmm.
Let's ground this in a historical reality. When we talk about the gold standard of disciplined translation during a crisis, we inevitably go back to August 1992.
Hurricane Andrew in South Florida.
Yeah. This was a catastrophic Category 5 hurricane. Entire neighborhoods in Homestead were literally wiped off the map.
It was devastating.
But when sociologists and meteorologists analyzed the broadcast communication during that night, the defining feature wasn't someone screaming about the apocalypse on television.
Far from it. The defining feature of the communication during Hurricane Andrew was an authoritative, relentless, calm presence.
The broadcaster just stayed on the air continuously.
Yeah, acting as a translator. They took a rapidly deteriorating, terrifying physical environment, roofs peeling off, transformers exploding, pitch blackness.
And they converted it into plain, actionable language.
Right. They didn't obsess over the raw barometric pressure data or the ensemble model outputs. They answered the primal questions people were asking in the dark.
Questions like, am I safe in the room I'm currently sitting in? Or, what do I do physically with my body if my roof starts to lift off?
Yeah, like, where's the interior hallway? Or pull a mattress over your head. They provided structure.
Because when external conditions become that chaotic, the human brain desperately seeks stability.
Mm-hmm. If the person holding the microphone is frantic, the audience panics and freezes. If the communicator is controlled, specific, and empathetic, the audience can focus on taking protective action.
I like to imagine being locked in a pitch-black room,
Right.
one that's just filled with tripwires and hazards.
Thanks, awful.
Right, and a terrible communicator hands you a highly detailed, incredibly accurate topographical map of the room, turns off their flashlight, and just leaves.
Which doesn't help you at all.
No. But a great broadcast meteorologist is like a guide in that dark room who holds your hand and tells you exactly where to step, when to duck, and when you need to stop moving entirely.
The topographical map is the raw atmospheric science, but the verbal guidance is the communication. Without the guidance, the map is useless in the dark.
I hear that, but I have to push back a little on the reality of modern media.
Okay, sure.
Broadcasters today are competing for attention against a million other things. You're scrolling on your phone, making dinner, yelling at your kids to do their homework.
It's a very noisy environment.
So isn't it completely natural for a communicator to want to sound urgent, to wave their arms a bit just to break through all that noise? Where is the line between a responsible level of urgency and just straight up hype?
It is a razor-thin line, and every operational meteorologist struggles with it. Responsible urgency focuses on explaining the why.
Why does this threat matter to you today?
Yeah. It identifies specific, consequential hazards, the decisions you need to make, and the deadlines for making them. Hype, by contrast, makes the communicator the center of the story.
Ah, I see.
Hype exaggerates confidence. It converts faint possibilities into absolute predictions. And it constantly emphasizes the absolute worst-case scenario without ever doing the math on how likely that scenario actually is.
So the tension between urgency and accuracy comes down entirely to vocabulary. It feels like the specific words meteorologists use can sometimes betray them when they're talking to the general public.
We really have to differentiate the vocabulary of operational meteorology from everyday street speech. Take the word forecast.
Okay.
To an atmospheric scientist, a forecast is a conditional, evolving, evidence-based assessment. It's inherently expected to change as new data is ingested into the computer models.
But in everyday conversation, people use forecast as a synonym for prediction.
And a prediction implies a definite claim. It implies a promise.
Right, like if you tell me you predict I'll win the lottery and I don't, you broke a promise.
We also see a massive, really dangerous confusion between the words possibility and probability.
Those sound so similar, but they mean totally different things.
Very different. A possibility is simply something that cannot be physically ruled out. Is it possible that a meteorite crashes through my roof while we're talking? Yes.
But is it probable?
No, the statistical chance is near zero. A probability is the actual statistical likelihood of an outcome occurring, and risk takes that probability and multiplies it by the actual consequences to human life and property.
This means hype often happens completely unintentionally.
Very often, yeah.
Like a communicator might be looking at a computer model, say one really aggressive model out of 50 different model runs.
They put that one extreme graphic on the screen because it's visually striking.
Right, highlighting a terrifying possibility, but they fail to anchor it to its actual probability.
And how does the audience process that? They look at the television or their phone, they see that extreme edge case, a map bleeding with deep reds and purples, showing a catastrophic strike on their hometown.
And they immediately mistake it for the expected, most likely outcome.
Yeah. The meteorologist might have verbally added the caveat. Now, this is just one outlier possibility, but the visual message and the emotional spike completely overwrite the verbal warning.
The human brain just holds on to the scary picture, and if you do that repeatedly, you run straight into warning fatigue.
You do. If a communicator uses up all their intense vocabulary on a standard Tuesday afternoon rainstorm,
Calling it historic or a bomb cyclone on social media just to get clicks.
the public's internal alarm system degrades. They become completely desensitized. If everything is unprecedented, nothing is unprecedented.
Then, when a truly generation-defining, life-threatening hurricane approaches the coast, the meteorologist reaches into their linguistic toolbox and finds it empty.
There's no escalated language left to use. They maxed out the volume dial weeks ago.
Let's put this into practice for the listener. Contrast two hypothetical broadcasts for me, just to show how this language alters behavior.
Okay, let's look at broadcast A. A meteorologist stands in front of a wide shot of the Atlantic Ocean and says, a direct hit on our city cannot be ruled out.
Which is a brilliant defensive statement because it's technically true of almost any storm when it's still 5 days away.
Right. It protects the forecaster, but it is entirely useless to the public. It leaves the audience in a state of generic, unguided panic. They don't know what to do with, cannot be ruled out.
So what's the alternative?
Now contrast that with broadcast B. The meteorologist says, based on current data, there is a 10% chance of storm surge entering one-story homes in this specific coastal zone. If you live in that zone, your evacuation should be completed by noon tomorrow.
The difference is staggering. Broadcast B gives me an action plan.
It connects a specific probability, 10%, to a specific relatable vulnerability.
A one-story home in a specific zone.
Then it immediately pairs that with an action and a deadline. It takes raw uncertainty and organizes it into usability.
But let me ask you this. People are overwhelmed, right? They're dealing with a million stressors. Don't they just want a binary answer?
Like, do I leave or do I stay?
Yeah. Doesn't trying to teach a stressed-out public about the nuances of a 10% probability just confuse them further?
That is the most common fear among broadcasters. But behavioral science proves it wrong.
Really?
Yeah. Giving a simple yes or no when the atmospheric science doesn't actually support that level of certainty is incredibly dangerous.
Because if you confidently say, yes, evacuate, and the storm shifts, you've cost your community millions of dollars and shattered their trust.
And if you confidently say no, stay, and the storm hits, people die.
So you have to share the probability.
The public is entirely capable of understanding probability if we explain it to them clearly. Think about how you handle a 30% chance of rain in your daily life.
Oh, sure. I understand exactly what that means. I don't cancel my entire day. I don't board up my windows.
But you probably grab an umbrella and roll up the windows on your car. We have to train the public to understand hurricane probabilities with that same level of practical, scalable application.
The struggle to simplify these complex probabilities is the exact reason the meteorological community created two of the most famous and perhaps most heavily criticized visual aids in weather history.
The track forecast cone and the Saffir-Simpson scale.
Let's break down the cone first because everyone knows what it looks like.
The National Hurricane Center's track forecast cone is iconic. You see it on every news channel. Yeah. But it is fundamentally a cognitive trap.
How so?
First, we need to understand what the cone physically represents. The cone only illustrates the probable track of the center of the storm.
That's the center.
Right. And it's constructed using historical official forecast errors. The circles that make up the cone are mathematically drawn so that, based on the last 5 years of forecasts, the center of the storm will stay within that cone about 2/3 of the time.
Wait, stop right there because that is wild. 2/3 of the time. That means 1 out of every 3 forecasts, the center of the hurricane will wander entirely outside of that shaded graphic.
The atmosphere does not respect the boundary of a graphic generated in an office. Furthermore, The cone widens as you move from day 1 out to day 5.
It looks like a megaphone.
It widens because uncertainty naturally increases the further out in time you attempt to project the future.
But the public does not interpret it as a geometric representation of historical error.
Not at all.
When I look at that cone, especially the solid black center line running right down the middle of it, my brain immediately views it as a strict boundary of danger.
We call that line fixation, and it's a massive vulnerability in public safety. People treat that center line like a highway route.
Right, so if the NHC issues an update and the line shifts 50 miles to the west, people on the eastern side of the cone breathe a huge sigh of relief.
They assume the threat has moved away from them entirely. But the hazards of a hurricane, the torrential rain, the destructive winds, the deadly storm surge, can extend hundreds of miles outward from that center point.
It creates a false binary in our minds. We assume that if we are outside the shaded cone, we are safe. And if we're inside the cone, we're in danger.
But a neighborhood completely outside the cone can experience catastrophic flooding, while a neighborhood inside the cone might just get a breezy rainstorm. The cone is not an evacuation map.
It doesn't show you the footprint of the hazards.
No, it only shows you the uncertainty of where the center point might travel.
And the second major cognitive trap we rely on is the Saffir-Simpson hurricane wind scale.
The category system.
Categories 1 through 5. It is literally how we culturally define these events.
We do, but as a comprehensive metric for human danger, it is deeply, dangerously flawed.
Because it only looks at one thing.
Yes. The Saffir-Simpson scale classifies storms strictly by one single variable, maximum sustained wind speed. That is the only piece of data it considers.
Which means it completely ignores storm surge.
And historically, storm surge is the deadliest hazard associated with tropical cyclones. It also ignores rainfall rates and inland freshwater flooding.
It ignores how fast the storm is moving forward, too.
And it ignores the physical width of the storm.
I try to explain this using a car crash analogy.
Oh, I like that one.
Rating a hurricane solely by wind speed is like rating the danger of a car crash solely by the speed of the vehicle. If I tell you, hey, don't worry, it's only a 30-mile-per-hour crash, that sounds survivable. But I'm completely ignoring whether you're in a tiny smart car or a loaded semi-truck.
Yeah, or if your car has airbags.
And crucially, I'm ignoring what you are crashing into. Are you hitting a pile of pillows or a concrete wall?
That is the perfect way to look at it. A mere Category 1 hurricane can push a catastrophic, life-threatening wall of storm surge into a community if the storm is physically massive and has been churning up the ocean for 3 days.
Or it can stall, right?
Yeah, Category 1 can cause an unprecedented disaster if its steering currents collapse, it stalls over a major metropolitan area, and it drops 50 inches of rain.
So why do we still use it then? If it's this flawed, could we ever replace the category system?
It's incredibly difficult to replace because it's simple, it's familiar, and it fits neatly into a chyron at the bottom of a news broadcast.
It's a convenient shorthand.
But the meteorological community is actively trying to shift the paradigm toward impact-based forecasting.
What does that look like?
Instead of fixating on whether a storm is a strong Category 2 or a weak Category 3, forecasters are prioritizing hazard-specific questions.
Like what specific neighborhoods will flood?
Exactly. When exactly will the sustained winds make the bridges unsafe for emergency vehicles? Which socially vulnerable populations are going to lose power, and for how many weeks?
It's shifting the entire conversation from what is the storm to what will the storm do to me?
Yes.
We can look at historical case studies that highlight exactly how the cone and the category have failed the public. Let's start with the cone and Hurricane Charley in 2004.
Charley is the textbook example of the danger of line fixation. Charley was moving toward the west coast of Florida.
And for days leading up to landfall, the center line of the forecast cone was pointing directly at the densely populated Tampa Bay area.
Millions of people in Tampa locked onto that line. But a hurricane isn't a train on a track. It's a fluid steered by surrounding weather patterns.
So it encountered an unseasonably strong trough of low pressure that caused it to turn sharply to the right.
Much earlier than many lay people anticipated.
So it completely bypassed Tampa and made a devastating landfall further south, absolutely wrecking Punta Gorda and Port Charlotte.
And the people in those southern communities felt blindsided. They felt like the forecasters had lied to them.
Because they were focused on Tampa. But here's the tragedy of the communication in 2004. The actual landfall point in Punta Gorda was entirely within the cone of uncertainty the entire time.
It was sitting right on the eastern edge of the cone. The meteorological forecast wasn't busted. The public's understanding of the graphic was busted.
They ignored the width of the cone and bet their safety on the center line.
Mm-hmm.
Now let's look at the failure of the category system. Hurricane Harvey in 2017.
Harvey made landfall on the Texas coast as a major Category 4 hurricane, so it certainly had the destructive winds.
But what cemented Harvey as a historic catastrophe was not the wind speed as it crossed the beach.
No, it was the fact that once it moved inland, the atmospheric steering currents completely collapsed. Harvey stalled.
It basically parked itself over southeastern Texas.
It sat there for days, functioning as a giant, stationary atmospheric water pump. It pulled endless moisture straight off the Gulf of Mexico and dumped it relentlessly over the Houston metro area.
Some localized areas saw 50 to 60 inches of rain.
The sheer weight and volume of that water created a freshwater flood disaster that far outlasted its initial wind category.
And here is the cognitive trap. Once Harvey moved inland and its winds naturally decreased, it was formally downgraded to a tropical storm.
Right. And when a person sitting in their living room hears downgraded to a tropical storm, their subconscious brain registers that as the danger passing.
But outside their window, the water was still rising.
The category number went down, but the human impact was escalating to historic, catastrophic proportions.
And, we saw this exact misunderstanding expanded even further with Hurricane Helene in 2024.
Oh, Helene is such a clear example of this. Helene made a massive landfall on the Florida coast.
But as it moved inland, its immense plume of moisture interacted with the mountainous terrain of the southern Appalachians.
Hundreds of miles away from the ocean. This interaction caused catastrophic, terrain-driven flooding and complete infrastructure collapse in communities that never think about hurricanes.
Mountain towns, places where people move to get away from coastal weather.
Helene proved definitively that hazards follow watersheds, terrain, and antecedent rainfall. They do not respect coastal identities, and they do not respect category numbers.
If a communicator only focuses on the coastal wind category, they're abandoning the inland populations who are about to face a massive life-threatening flood event. This hyper-focus on single numbers and categories doesn't just warp how we understand individual storms. It scales up and warps how we understand entire hurricane seasons.
Which brings us to the summer of 2026.
And the below-normal trap. Let's set the stage here. In midsummer 2026, forecasters from major meteorological agencies, including NOAA, updated their seasonal outlook for the Atlantic Basin.
They analyzed the global data and reduced their forecast, predicting a below-normal season.
Specifically, they called for about 8 to 14 named storms, 3 to 6 hurricanes, and 1 to 3 major hurricanes.
And I know exactly what happens when those numbers drop.
When the public hears the phrase below normal, there is an immediate psychological release valve. People tune out.
They decide not to buy the expensive plywood this year. They don't service their generators. They assume they're off the hook.
But shouldn't they? If the top scientists are saying the season will be quiet, why shouldn't I save my money and relax?
Because it is a fundamental misunderstanding of what a seasonal outlook is designed to do, which is incredibly dangerous.
But before we dive into the psychology of why you shouldn't drop your guard, we need to explain the actual physical mechanics that drove that 2026 downgrade. Why were forecasters expecting fewer storms?
The primary driver was the expected development of a moderate to strong El Niño pattern.
Combined with less favorable sea surface temperatures in the tropical Atlantic. Let's unpack that for the listener because the mechanics are fascinating.
Sure.
So El Niño is a warming of the ocean waters in the central and eastern Pacific Ocean. But what does warm water in the Pacific Ocean have to do with a hurricane forming off the coast of Africa in the Atlantic? It feels totally disconnected.
It feels disconnected until you realize the atmosphere is a single, continuous global fluid. Everything is connected.
Okay.
When you heat up the surface of the Pacific Ocean during an El Niño, it warms the air above it. That warm air rises, which alters global atmospheric circulation patterns.
Specifically, a massive conveyor belt of air known as the Walker circulation.
Right. And this shift causes a domino effect across the hemisphere. Ultimately, it increases upper-level westerly winds across the Caribbean Sea and the tropical Atlantic.
And those upper-level winds blowing across the Atlantic create what we call vertical wind shear.
Precisely. Vertical wind shear is simply a change in wind speed or wind direction as you go higher up in the atmosphere.
To understand why shear is the absolute enemy of a hurricane, you have to picture how a hurricane is physically built.
Right, a developing tropical cyclone needs to be vertically stacked. It's essentially a massive heat engine pulling warm, moist air up from the ocean surface, and it needs to exhaust that air out the top of the storm to maintain its structure and drop its central pressure.
So the analogy I use for this is building a tall brick chimney.
Oh, yeah, that's a good visual.
Like if the air is calm, you can stack the bricks perfectly straight, one on top of the other, and the chimney draws the smoke up perfectly.
Mm-hmm.
But if someone is standing halfway up your ladder, constantly kicking the bricks horizontally while you're trying to build.
The chimney tilts, it falls apart, and the fire dies.
Yeah. Strong vertical wind shear acts like that person kicking the bricks.
It rips the tops off of developing thunderstorms. It displaces the heat and moisture away from the center of circulation. If the storm isn't vertically aligned, the pressure can't drop, and the hurricane cannot intensify.
So in 2026, the expectation of El Niño meant a higher likelihood of strong wind shear acting as an atmospheric roadblock for developing storms.
And the second factor was the sea surface temperatures in the Atlantic itself. Hurricanes feed entirely on warm ocean water.
And while some localized areas were warm, the overall pattern across the main development region was less supportive.
It was somewhat cooler relative to the hyperactive boiling years we'd seen previously. So you have less high-octane fuel in the water and more wind shear in the air to tear the storms apart.
Scientifically, it makes complete sense to downgrade the season total. But operationally, as a communicator, how do you handle that? If the ingredients are genuinely less favorable, why is it a trap for a coastal resident to breathe a sigh of relief?
It is the single biggest trap in seasonal forecasting, because a seasonal outlook is a probabilistic assessment of basin-wide activity.
Okay, meaning what?
It's an estimate of how many total storms will form over millions of square miles of ocean over a 6-month period. It is not a local landfall forecast.
The overall number of storms says absolutely nothing about where any single storm will travel.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah, emergency managers face this incredibly difficult task of adjusting public expectations without making people abandon their preparedness plans entirely.
Because if you tell a community the season is below normal, they translate that to zero risk.
But it only takes one single storm making landfall in your specific zip code to completely redefine your life, your community, and your local history.
And the ultimate, undeniable proof of that caveat is the 1992 season. We talked about Hurricane Andrew earlier regarding communication, but look at the climatology of that year.
The 1990 Atlantic hurricane season was, by almost all statistical metrics, a relatively quiet, below-normal season.
The overarching atmospheric conditions were not highly favorable for rampant storm development.
No, there were only 6 named storms that entire year, but the very first one on the list was Andrew.
Which formed late in August, battled wind shear initially, but eventually found a small pocket of favorable conditions.
It rapidly intensified into a Category 5 and devastated South Florida.
So a season with an incredibly low storm count produced one of the most consequential, destructive, and expensive U.S. landfalls in modern history.
That is why the 1992 caveat is so vital to remember. If you lived in Homestead, Florida in 1992, the fact that the season overall was mathematically below normal was completely irrelevant as your roof was being ripped off your house.
Preparedness recommendations cannot be scaled down just because the basin-wide storm count is lower.
Residents still need an evacuation plan, they still need to review their insurance policies, and they still need to know their flood zone. A lower seasonal outlook simply reduces the total number of opportunities for a landfall, but it grants absolutely no one immunity.
And, that hyper-focus on the number of named storms in a season trickles all the way down to how we treat individual weather systems, too.
Oh, absolutely.
We get so obsessed with a storm getting a specific name that we ignore the immediate physical impacts right in front of us.
Let's look at July 2026. There was a disorganized, low-pressure system lingering near the Florida Peninsula.
And early in its lifespan, the media focus, the social media chatter, the entire public conversation was centered on one singular question.
Will this system become a named tropical depression or tropical storm?
Because naming provides a really clean news hook. It's easy for a producer to put a graphic that says watching Tropical Storm Arthur on the screen. It creates a narrative suspense. Will it or won't it?
It creates a compelling narrative arc for television, but that narrative distorts risk perception entirely. As we discussed with Harvey and Helene, severe rainfall, coastal flooding, rough surf, and dangerous rip currents can happen completely independent of a tropical classification.
The atmosphere does not wait for the National Hurricane Center to officially assign a name before it starts raining on your house.
Right.
I always remind people, floodwater rising in your living room does not care if the storm had a name or not. The damage to your drywall is identical.
The label only matters to our sense of validation. But what happens if a system like this July 2026 low-pressure area doesn't get a name?
The system fails to organize, it never gets a formal title, but it still moves onshore and dumps 6 to 10 inches of rain on an already saturated coastal area.
People feel cheated. They think the forecast was a bust or a false alarm, even as their own streets are flooding.
If the communicator spent 4 days hyping the name of the potential storm instead of the rain the storm would produce, the public feels misled.
Ethical communication requires telling the audience what the impacts are going to be, regardless of the storm's identity. The framing has to shift. Instead of saying, we are watching Investa San 95L to see if it becomes a depression.
Wait, before you go on, what exactly is an invest? You hear that term thrown around a lot on weather blogs?
An invest is simply an investigative area. It's a naming convention used by meteorologists to identify weather systems they want to run specialized computer models on.
So it's an administrative label, not a threat level.
Right, but when lay people hear Invest 95L, it sounds highly technical and alarming. So instead of focusing on the jargon, the framing should be, we have a broad area of tropical moisture moving toward the coast that will bring heavy rain on Tuesday, and by the way, it might also develop a closed circulation.
The impacts must lead the broadcast.
Always. And this brings up a crucial responsibility for communicators, the ethics of de-escalation.
The ethics of de-escalation, that is fascinating. How do you walk back a threat once people are already scared?
When a meteorological threat diminishes, the media coverage must contract proportionally. In the digital age, a meteorologist or a news outlet might post a very ominous map showing a potential tropical system 10 days out.
And that post goes viral. It gets thousands of shares and retweets.
But 2 days later, the computer models shift, the wind shear increases, and the physical threat of development drops to near zero.
But that original viral post is still out there, circulating in group chats.
Yes, and there is a massive temptation for communicators to keep the suspense alive, to say, well, the model's backed off, but it still could develop, we can't rule it out, simply because that initial threat generated so much engagement and viewership.
Keeping an outdated threat alive just because it performs well on an algorithm is a severe breach of public trust.
You have a duty to close the loop. You must aggressively and clearly tell your audience when a threat has passed or diminished.
If we look at how a responsible update for that specific July 2026 event should sound once the development odds dropped, it would be something like this. The disturbance remains disorganized and has a very low chance of becoming a tropical cyclone. However, regardless of development, repeated heavy rain is going to cause localized flooding over the next 24 hours. Avoid flooded roads.
It's boring.
It is remarkably boring.
But it's true, and it is actionable. It closes the loop on the tropical anxiety while maintaining the necessary vigilance for the freshwater flood threat. De-escalation proves to your audience that your urgency is tied to actual evidence, not just to a desire for ratings.
Getting people to act on that unglamorous, unnamed flood threat brings us to the final and perhaps most complex piece of the puzzle.
Understanding human psychology, social vulnerability, and how the digital age is rewiring risk communication entirely.
This is where we step out of atmospheric physics and fully into sociology and psychology. We have to understand that human beings do not receive warnings as passive robots.
No, you don't just input a weather warning and output an evacuation. People interpret every single piece of information through a complex filter of their prior experiences, their social ties, their available resources, and the visible cues around them.
We have to talk about confirmation seeking, because when someone sees an emergency alert pop up on their phone that says, "Evacuate now," they rarely just grab their keys and walk out the door immediately.
Almost never. The immediate psychological response to a threat is to verify it. It's a biological pause.
Like when a fire alarm goes off in an office building, people don't instantly sprint for the exits.
Right, they look at their coworkers, they slowly pack their laptops, they mill around. The same applies to hurricanes. When the alert comes, they check multiple sources.
They turn on the local news, they open a weather app, they call their sister across town.
And they physically look out the window to see what the sky looks like or what their neighbors are doing.
If Bob next door isn't boarding up his windows, maybe it's not that bad.
We anchor our behavior to our community. And if those sources conflict, if the TV says evacuate, but the app shows the storm missing them, and Bob is having a barbecue hesitation grows, the brain freezes.
This is why consistency across official channels is so vital.
It is. But beyond psychology, We have to acknowledge the hard reality of social vulnerability.
A technically perfect, clear forecast is completely useless if the person receiving it does not have the capacity to act on it. Evacuating is a massive socioeconomic privilege.
We saw this tragically play out during Hurricane Katrina in 2005, and again in different devastating ways during Hurricane Ian in 2022.
The National Hurricane Center can issue a perfect track forecast and a perfectly worded evacuation order. But what if the listener doesn't own a vehicle?
Or what if they don't have the $500 for gas and a hotel room 300 miles away?
Mhm.
What if they're living paycheck to paycheck and leaving means missing a shift that will cost them their rent?
What if they have a disabled family member who requires specialized refrigerated medical transport?
Or what if they don't speak English as their first language? Or they have a historically rooted deep distrust of government authorities, like the EPA or local officials, telling them they have to leave their homes.
All of those factors construct a massive wall between the meteorological forecast and the protective action.
A technically clear evacuation message is completely useless to a listener who lacks a safe, accessible destination. Communication has to account for these vulnerabilities.
It has to connect people with local emergency management resources, shelter locations, and public transit options. You can't just yell, "Leave," louder, and expect it to solve a socioeconomic barrier.
And now, as if human psychology and sociology weren't complex enough, we have poured gasoline on the fire with the digital age. Social media algorithms are designed to reward speed, novelty, and absolute outrage over careful, proportional context.
We are facing an unprecedented danger with AI and social media clickbait in meteorology. I see this constantly on my own feeds. You'll be scrolling in mid-August, and suddenly there's a map showing a Category 5 hurricane hitting New York City 14 days from now.
What you're usually seeing in those instances is a single, extreme, deterministic model run, intentionally cherry-picked from dozens of other ensemble runs that show nothing of the sort.
Can you explain the difference for the listener? When I see a terrifying map on a social media post, what is a deterministic run versus an ensemble?
Think of a deterministic run as asking one single computer to guess the exact future based on one set of initial data. An ensemble is like polling a room of 50 computers, each with slightly different starting data, to see the broad spread of possibilities. An ensemble gives you a realistic average.
While a deterministic run can sometimes show a wild, terrifying outlier.
Right. Social media accounts will post that single outlier run without any ensemble context, entirely to incite viral panic and harvest engagement.
And now, with generative AI, bad actors can create highly realistic, completely fabricated forecast maps.
Or even generate synthetic audio of government officials issuing fake warnings.
So, as a layperson, if I'm looking at my phone and I see a terrifying weather map, how do I quickly judge if the source is genuinely trying to inform me or if they're just farming my fear for clicks?
It requires a new kind of digital literacy. First, look for timestamps. Real operational meteorological data is always clearly anchored to a specific issuance time.
Second, look for ensemble context.
Right. A trustworthy source will not post a 14-day deterministic map as gospel. They will explain the spread of possibilities.
Third, look at the vocabulary. Is the post focused on generating pure fear, using words like apocalyptic, wipeout, or historic?
Or is it focused on action, clearly explaining what is known, what is uncertain, and what specific steps you should take?
To combat this digital chaos, the meteorological community really has to establish a recognizable, standardized format of trust, something the public can easily identify.
Which brings us to a really fantastic tool, the SciUA framework. SICUA.
What does that stand for?
The SciUA framework is a structure designed for every single update a communicator provides. It's designed to cut through the noise and provide immediate value. The S stands for status.
What is it and where is it?
Exactly. This grounds the update in physical reality and kills rumors immediately. For example, it is a Category 2 hurricane currently located 300 miles south of Miami.
Simple, factual, undeniable, no adjectives.
The I stands for impacts. This shifts the focus away from the storm's identity and onto the human consequences. We are expecting 6 to 9 feet of storm surge in these Pacific coastal counties and wind gusts over 80-mile-an-hour inland.
You are answering the "what will it do to me" question right at the top of the broadcast.
Then we have C for change. What is different from the last update? Since our 5 p.m. broadcast, the track has shifted slightly east, meaning the highest rain totals will also shift east.
This is crucial because it acknowledges the evolving science without making it seem like you were wrong earlier. It also validates the viewer who has been paying attention all day. It builds continuity.
The U is for uncertainty. What variable could still alter the outcome? The storm is currently interacting with dry air. If it overcomes that dry air, wind speeds could be higher than currently forecast.
This prepares the public's expectations for future adjustments.
And finally, A is for action. What is the deadline to prepare? All preparations and evacuations must be completed by 8 p.m. tonight before tropical storm force winds arrive and make travel impossible.
Status, impacts, change, uncertainty, action. If every broadcast, every tweet, every app notification followed that structure, the public would have such a massive advantage in processing these threats.
It builds a dependable cognitive architecture that people can recognize even when they're under extreme psychological stress. It creates a rhythm of reliability.
When external conditions are chaotic, people need structural reliability. They need to know that their trusted source isn't going to flip out over a single erratic computer model.
Right, but is going to calmly process the data, synthesize it, and translate it into a timeline for survival.
This has been an incredibly enlightening conversation. If we bring this entire narrative to a close, the central theme here is agency. As communicators and as individuals living in vulnerable areas, we have agency.
Preparedness is routine risk management. It is not panic. And for the meteorological community, acknowledging honest uncertainty in a forecast isn't a weakness. It's the ultimate foundation of public trust.
The science is going to continue to improve, our supercomputers will get faster, our satellite tracking will get sharper, and we will understand the physics of the atmosphere more deeply every single year.
But the real leap in public safety, that's going to come from better communication. A scientifically perfect forecast that no one understands is just an academic exercise in a vacuum.
We have to respect the limitations of the science, the profound psychology of the audience, and the immense responsibility of holding the microphone when the sky turns dark. We started today by talking about the murky, diagnostic, muddy waters of weather forecasting. Unlike the clean, binary break of a bone on an X-ray, the atmosphere is a chaotic, swirling fluid.
But what we've learned is that the communication surrounding it doesn't have to be chaotic.
We can navigate the murkiness with discipline, with clarity, and with a relentless focus on the human beings at the end of the forecast. But it does leave you with a rather provocative question about the future.
What's that?
If the digital age is already flooding us with AI-generated deterministic clickbait, what happens when AI gets good enough to bypass the human meteorologist entirely? What happens when your phone generates a hyper-personalized, fully synthetic risk assessment for your exact address, but it completely conflicts with the official guidance from the National Hurricane Center? Who do you trust when the human translator is removed from the equation entirely?
That is a huge question. I guess the next time a storm is brewing in the Gulf of Mexico or the Atlantic, and you find yourself glued to a screen watching a spaghetti plot of colorful lines, ask yourself a question.
Are you seeking information to make a practical decision, or are you just seeking certainty in an inherently uncertain world?
Because the atmosphere owes us no certainty, but we owe it to ourselves to be prepared for its possibilities.
Well said. If you enjoyed today's discussion, please like, follow, comment, and share this episode, and leave a rating or review.
Yeah, and make sure to follow Rob Jones on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, and Facebook to stay up to date.
You've been listening to Meteorology Matters, created by meteorologist Rob Jones.